Good afternoon, I'm Isabel and today I want to take you into a painting that is almost impossible to take in at first glance. When you stand in front of Otto Dix's monumental triptych, The War, your first instinct is to simply think, wow, that's huge, how long did that take? The sheer scale of it, over 2.5 meters high, hits you before anything else does. And that reaction is completely understandable. Large works like this can overwhelm us into stepping back rather than leaning in. We see the size, the drama, the impact, but sometimes we forget to look closely. And with works like this, that means you can miss the most extraordinary thing, the detail. Every inch of this painting is packed with information and memories and sheer moral force. It's a painting that demands not just our eyes, but our full attention. Today, I want to help you step closer and really look. To understand his painting The War, we first need to understand Otto Dix himself and the world he survived. He served as a machine gunner in the German army during the First World War. He fought on the Western Front, in the trenches, through bombardments that lasted for days. This was not heroic combat, it was mechanical slaughter, industrialized death on an unprecedented scale. These experiences stayed with him. He suffered recurring nightmares of the war for years afterwards, and painting became the way that he processed his trauma, but it also became something else, somewhat of a warning. Fast forward into the 1920s and 30s, Germany was sliding towards the rise of Nazism. The Nazis exalted war as this cleansing, noble, masculine force. But they wanted images of heroism and sacrifice and patriotic glory. But Dix offered the complete opposite. His paintings were brutally honest and unromantic, even accusatory. They exposed what war actually looked like. And because of this, his art was labeled degenerate. So, the war created between 1929 and 1932 sits at a crucial moment. It was painted when Dix himself was finally ready to confront his trauma, and just before the Nazis came into power and attempted to rewrite the story of the First World War. This triptych is his counter-argument, a vast, unignorable monument to reality. Dix deliberately used the format of a religious triptych, something traditionally found in churches, such as Matthias Grunewald's Eisenheim altarpiece, which presents Christ's suffering across multiple panels. In works like these, triptychs usually present sacred narratives, Christ's birth, his crucifixion, resurrection, inviting viewers to contemplate pain as something redemptive. By adopting this format for the war, Dix implies something radical, that the experience of modern warfare has replaced religious martyrdom. The broken bodies of soldiers echo Grunewald's tortured Christ, suggesting that suffering is no longer confined for the spiritual realm, but has become a collective human experience. War, for Dix, became the modern passion. Before analysing the panels themselves, it's important to consider how Dix actually constructed his work. He used a mixture of oil and tempera on wood, a technique associated with early Renaissance altarpieces. Tempera dries to this very matte, almost chalky surface, while oil allows for finer detailing. This combination gives the painting an unusual, slightly uneven texture that you can see even from a distance. Up close, the surface has a strange effect on the viewer. There's a dryness, a sort of stiffness. The paint makes the scene feel stark, almost airless. It doesn't invite you in gently, instead it confronts you. And that, in some ways, becomes part of the psychological impact itself. The texture prevents the painting from feeling like an illusion. You're constantly reminded that it's a constructed image, a deliberate record, something crafted by a witness that wants you to stay alert. The surface doesn't allow you to drift into distance or romanticization. It keeps pulling you back into the reality of what you're seeing. But now let's look at each panel close up. The left panel shows soldiers marching off to war at dawn, and it immediately sets a tone of foreboding. The first thing I noticed was the light. The rising sun is red, but it's not warm or soft. The hue is not golden, but it's harsh, blood-coloured. It seems to stain the landscape itself. The soldiers themselves are shrouded in this mist, a sort of haze, which blurs the edges of their bodies. They form this single ominous mass, losing their individuality as they merge with each other. The merging makes them almost spectral, as though they are already halfway to the grave, even on their going into war. Dix emphasizes the mechanical, dehumanized nature through their posture. Their bodies lean forward in unison, like machines being turned on, stiff and automatic. If you look closely, the uniforms are precise but harshly rendered. The helmets heavily but featureless, hiding expressions entirely. There's no camaraderie, no laughter, no pride. Even the ground under their feet they are walking on is rough and uneven, hinting at the difficult path. In the background, the buildings and landscape are muted and broken, almost dissolving into the haze. The emptiness isolates the soldiers. emphasizing their vulnerability and the inevitability of their journey ahead. This is the beginning, but it's already tragic, the first step of a journey that only leads to destruction. In the central panel, the scale of devastation becomes overwhelming. It's the heart of the triptych. We see bodies tangled with debris, limbs protrude at impossible angles, flesh has a waxy pale quality as they drained of life long ago. Everything is fragmented, bodies, buildings, even the earth itself underneath their feet. This fragmentation is psychologically accurate as war breaks the world literally and mentally. If you look at the palette, it's cold greys, sickly yellows, muddy reds. They aren't expressive, the colours feel almost medical, like the colour of corpses in a morgue. One of the most disturbing features is the soldier whose face is almost entirely missing, just a hollow cavity where his identity once was, placed alongside photos of the Ghoulie Cassis, First World War soldiers, whose faces were destroyed by shrapnel. This image becomes chillingly documentary, rather than symbolic. Dix is not exaggerating, he is translating lived reality through paint. The faceless, headless figure mirrors the irreversible physical trauma captured in these photographs. In both cases, the destruction of the face represents more than the physical bodily injury. It signifies the erasure of identity and individuality, and almost humanity itself. Unlike traditional war art, which often preserves the hero's recognizable features, Dix presents soldiers as anonymous remains, fragments reduced by modern mechanized combat. What we see, therefore, is not a metaphor, but a memory, a visual record of what Dix witnessed and refused to forget. If you look deeper, the shapes echo one another. Twisted beams look like bones, ruins resemble decomposing tissue. Nature and humanity are decaying side by side, indistinguishable from one another. Even the ground is corpse-like. There is no center of heroism here. No one stands tall, triumphant. The main character is the destruction itself. And yet it is painted with astonishing precision, every fraction rendered meticulously, making sure you cannot ignore the gruesome detail. On the right panel, the soldiers return from the battlefield, but it's far from a triumphant homecoming. The figures appear skeletal, almost shuffling, almost zombie-like. Their bodies thin, movements laboured, their heads hang low, giving the impression they are now more ghosts than men. They are shadows of themselves, carrying the weight of all they have experienced. In the foreground, a man carries a wounded comrade, movement stiff, tense, unnatural, as if both may collapse at any moment. The ground around them is littered with debris and broken equipment, creating a sense of chaos that continues even in their return. Smoke or fog still hangs in the air, blending the landscape and the figures, suggesting that the horrors of war follow them, they cannot escape. What's especially striking to me is what is absent. There's no joy, no relief, no celebration. There's no sense of closure or welcome. They may have survived the battlefield, but they have returned altered, stripped of their vitality, their identity, and their humanity. This panel forces the viewer to confront the long shadow of war, that survival does not always equal restoration, and the aftermath of conflict lingers as vividly as the fighting itself. At the bottom, like the base of an altarpiece, is the predella, a scene of silent, frozen death. Soldiers lie on what looks like a shallow grave or an open crypt. The bodies are rigid, the space claustrophobic. There is no sky, no horizon, just entrapment. In traditional Christian triptychs, like the predella of the Eisenheim altarpiece, this lower panel depicts the entombment of Christ, reinforcing themes of physical suffering, death, but spiritual endurance through faith. This is deliberately inverted by Dix, this convention, because instead of a sacred body that promises resurrection, he presents mass, ominous corpses with no sense of redemption. These bodies could be anyone. They are stripped of their individuality, stripped of their story. And in that way, it's an anti-altarpiece, an altar not to salvation, but to memory. So why does the war matter? The war matters because it refuses to let war become abstract. It refuses to let horror become nostalgia and let anyone pretend that war is noble or to be desired. At a time where fascism was rising and glorifying violence, Dix created a painting that tells the truth, a painting that forces us to look, and really look, at what conflict does to the human body and its psyche. But beyond its historical power, it's a model of artistic courage. He took the language of religious art, the triptych, and transformed it into a secular memorial. Every panel a reminder, each detail a witness. When you stand in front of this painting, you feel its scale, but when you step closer, you feel its meaning. And that's the point. Dix wanted to create a work so monumental but so detailed and so brutally honest that the memory of war can never again be simplified or romanticized. And that's why it remains one of the most important anti-war pieces in the history of art. Thank you.